Hello and welcome to the webinar. Today's presentation is presented to you by the Youth Travel Foundation. We are a charity based in Canada, and we promote travel as an educational tool for young adults and teenagers. So we do it two different ways. First of all, we offer travel resources such as this webinar, and we also offer travel grants. So after the session, make sure to have a look at our website to see if you could get funding for your next project. My name is Arianne. I am the coordinator of the Youth Travel Foundation. Sorry. I am an avid traveler, but I also happen to have a very terrible immune system. So I get sick pretty much every time I leave the country, but that does not stop me from traveling. And today we are here to give you tips on how to stay healthy as much as possible, but also what to do in case you get sick while abroad. So I've been to all kinds of different travel settings, from a mud house in the West African savannah to a five-star resort in the Caribbean. And I learned that luxury travel is not necessarily going to keep you from being sick, and being a developing country doesn't mean that you're going to be sick either. So to help give you valuable tips today, I brought in a expert, I could say, on the topic. She is the author of the famous blog, The Pink Backpack, and she is a PhD candidate in global health, Stephanie Huff. Hi, Stephanie.
Hello. Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Tell us a bit about you and about your blog, The Pink Backpack.
Sure. So, as you said in your introduction, I am the blogger, the face behind The Pink Backpack, where I write about solo female travel, everything from misadventures, basically making fun of myself, to tips to try to help you have the best travels you can and to stay safe. I'm also a PhD candidate in global health, so I'm currently based in Tanzania to do my PhD research, which I'm studying gender equity or women's rights in a Tanzanian setting.
Good. So thank you so much for being here and answer all my questions today. Before we move on to the heat of the topic, I would like to introduce our moderator for the session, Marie-Gilles Fabrice. Hi, Marie-Gilles.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good too.
I'm good. Can you tell us a little bit about your work at HI Canada?
Of course. So I'm a marketing coordinator for HI Canada. HI Canada stands for Hosteling International Canada. We are a not-for-profit organization with a mission to build a community of conscious travelers who share a greater understanding of people, places, and cultures. In Canada, we have 54 HI hostels scattered around the country from ocean to ocean. And on the international level, we are part of Hosteling International, the largest hostel network in the world, regrouping a total of 3,300 hostels in more than 64 countries.
You are also a traveler yourself. You traveled and lived in many countries. Have you gotten sick a lot?
Absolutely. So,
and you survived.
Yes. With the little tricks, you learn how to get around staying healthy while traveling. But it's definitely a challenge that I've experienced.
Okay, so today you're going to be monitoring the social media and this platform as well. Can you tell us how the session is going to work?
Absolutely. So in the bottom right of your screen, you can see the chat section. So you can write your questions over there, and we're going to answer them at the end of the webinar. Also, if you're live with us on Facebook, you can write your questions or your comments in the comment section, and we're also going to address those ones at the end of the webinar.
Great. So we will start with the interview, and Marie-Gilles, we will see you at the end of the session. Thank you. So the first, there's going to be many different sections in this webinar. The first one is about travel preparation. So I've got a few questions for you, Stephanie. First of all, we're going to talk about travel insurances. It is of the utmost importance to travel with a good insurance. Sometimes you think you're healthy, but you never know what can happen. Can you give us tips on how to find a good insurance and what to look for in a policy coverage?
So that's a really great question. And as you said, travel insurance is so important when going abroad because unfortunately life is unpredictable. So we never know when we might be involved in an accident or our plans might just change and travel becomes interrupted. So travel insurance protects you and your family from paying exorbitant costs if hospitalization or evacuation is required, or if something happens and you're just not able to go on your trip anymore. But how do we actually choose a good insurance package? It can be super tricky to figure this out, and there's tons of options to choose from. So, having a basic understanding of what you need covered is a good start. So, the first and most obvious one is basic medical needs. So, that would be if you get sick, you need to see a doctor and you need some prescription medication. The second would be medical emergencies, and this one's really important. So it would be if you required hospitalization, or let's say you got a tooth knocked out and you needed emergency dental care. And part and parcel with a medical emergency is emergency evacuation. So let's say you are hospitalized and in critical care, and you need to be flown back to your home country for further medical evaluation. This can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars without insurance. Then there would be lost luggage, theft or damage, and trip cancellation or interruption. Then some additional thoughts, which aren't always included in basic insurance packages, would be rental car insurance. So if you plan on driving while you're abroad, you should think about rental theft or damage, and adventure activities. So activities that are considered higher risk aren't always included in insurance. So things like scuba diving, skydiving, even skiing, you need to consider if you're going to be doing those activities, and if an injury occurred, you might not be covered with just a basic standard package. You also might want to consider what country you're going to and whether that's considered a high-risk country. So when looking at insurance packages, make sure that they cover most countries in the world and whether they are 24-hour operations. So if you needed emergency services or help, are they going to be around to help you 24 hours of the day? So now that we sort of know what we should be thinking about, it's important for you to consider the activities you'll be doing and the gear that you're going to be bringing, as well reading the fine print on any insurance package before buying it, so you know how much you're actually covered for and what you require to make a claim. So cheaper packages might only cover 10 to 50,000 in medical coverage, but that won't necessarily be enough for hospital bills. Let's say you require surgery or transport. So typically looking for plans in the 100,000 range would be a good start. But just to give you some perspective, mine's actually up to 5 million per incident. And also checking the stipulations for travel insurance or cancellation, because sometimes they're only pertaining to a medical emergency, and maybe you just want it to sort of cover your back in case you miss a flight or your trip just gets cancelled. The other piece, as I mentioned, is to read the fine print and to know what you need to do in order to make a claim. So I've experienced in the past where I went to a doctor and I wanted to claim my receipts and get reimbursed after the fact, but I didn't actually have any documentation that had the doctor's registration number, and unfortunately they needed that. I just had receipts, so I wasn't actually able to get reimbursed. So knowing ahead of time what you need, and so that you can have those, you be able to get those documents in the moment, will enable you to rest assured that you can have all of your expenses reimbursed. So lastly, where can I find travel insurance? There's so many options. For any of you who are students, check first to see if you've already paid for insurance through your tuition fees. So for me, I'm still a PhD student. I actually pay for health insurance directly in my tuition, and this includes up to 120 days of travel, up to $5 million per incident. And if you're going to be traveling longer than 3 months, let's say you're studying abroad or doing an internship of some type, if you're able to prove that that's academic related, sometimes they can extend that. So for me, because I'm abroad doing research, I was able to prove that it was for academic purposes. So my travel insurance was extended for free up to a year. So this would be the best option for students, I think, for medical because it's free. And just note that it might not cover your personal belongings. So you might need to, if you're traveling with expensive gear, you might want to consider something on top of that. The next, you can look with your bank for travel insurance. So I bank with BMO, Bank of Montreal. So I can go online, get a quote right on their website, and it will tell you your different options based on price. So this can range from $100 to $200 a month, depending on the length of time you're going. You just calculate that right on the website. Next, you could look at credit cards. So some credit cards offer comprehensive insurance, car rental insurance, hotel room theft, but medical might only be for 2 weeks maximum outside of the country. So it can be a nice option to have on top of another insurance package, but perhaps not the best option for someone traveling long term. So I actually use an American Express card specifically because it has car rental insurance and hotel room theft, but I have my medical package on top of that. And then lastly, you can look directly with insurance companies, and some good international ones are World Nomad, and I've used them on and off for years. And some options for personal use, but I've heard are good that you could look into are Clements, IM Global, or MedJet Assist.
And we can never stress it enough. You need a travel insurance if you're going to go abroad. No matter how healthy you think you are or how careful you think you are, you never know what can happen. And the bills rack up pretty quickly. I was unfortunately hospitalized when I was in the United States for an incident that was really beyond me being careful. And I only stayed for 2 days, and the bill was over $100,000. So if I did not have medical insurance, I would have been screwed. And also make sure that you look for pre-existing conditions, because sometimes certain companies are not going to cover a condition, or they're going to require you to have a paper from your doctor saying that you've been stable for a certain amount of time before leaving. So these are important things to look for if you're going to buy an insurance.
Absolutely.
My next question is about vaccination. It is also very important when traveling to get a vaccination, not only to protect yourself, but to also protect the people that you're going to be visiting. It is sometimes required in certain countries to have certain vaccinations. So where can you find the information about the requirements and the safety of vaccination?
So like you said, vaccinations are really important to avoid the spread of preventable diseases, things like the measles, hepatitis A, even rabies. And it can also be a great idea to help avoid getting sick, because you can actually get vaccinated against travelers' diarrhea to just give yourself a boost. But in order to find out more information on whether certain vaccines are mandatory, there are tons of travel clinics all throughout Canada. You could ask your doctor, but a great resource online to find out if vaccines are necessary is the Government of Canada travel website. You can literally plug in your destination and it will tell you for that destination what you need or what's recommended. You can also check out Immunize Canada website, which is another great resource online. But an example of a vaccine which is required to enter a country is the yellow fever vaccine. So that's good for 10 years and you just get a certificate. I just keep mine inside my passport, so I always have it with me when I'm traveling. But it is required in most countries to enter if you're transiting from a country where there's the risk of that disease. So for me, when I cross most borders in East Africa, I have to show this certificate. However, note that there's currently a shortage of this vaccine in Canada. So regardless of which vaccines you need, it's always a good idea to be prepared when you're planning your travels to give yourself some time to get vaccinated.
Yes, because also I think there are certain vaccines that take more than one dose, so you need to do it a few times before leaving, and it can take up to 3 months, I think so.
Yeah, and they do have vaccination sort of centers or rooms at airports. So if you try to risk it and try to get through and they catch you, they will make you on the spot do a vaccine or you're denied entry. So I think I'd personally rather just do it at home in a less stressful environment.
Yes, so here are a couple links. You can take a screenshot of this page. So there's the World Health Organization that has a lot of information about health and traveling in general. There's the website of the Government of Canada, which Stephanie was talking about, which really is thorough. You can enter your destination and it's going to tell you what is required, what is suggested. And there's the American Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which also has a lot of good information about vaccination. So do not hesitate to follow these links before going abroad and get the vaccination you need to protect yourself and the others. Now, prescription medication. Some people have to take medication daily. Is it hard to travel with prescription medication? And if so, how do you do that?
This is a really great question, and this is going to depend on your destination, and it really does vary significantly based on the country you're entering. So in some countries, drugs that are legal and readily available here in Canada are considered illegal, require a prescription, or might even cause suspicion among local customs and immigration authorities. So it's really wise to check directly with the foreign government office of the country you're going to before you actually go. And you can actually find this information again through the Government of Canada website. So that's a really great all-around resource for you. Unfortunately, I don't have personal experience with this as I don't have prescription medicine, but some examples of medicines that might require a prescription for you to actually take your prescription when you travel are narcotics, so different kinds of painkillers, antidepressants, or anything that might require an injection. And particular caution needs to be taken with medical marijuana, as the substance is illegal in some countries, including the United States. So in the States, it's legal in some states, but its use is still considered a federal felony. So definitely just try to do your research. And again, the Government of Canada website is a great resource to do that.
And maybe try to keep any medication in the original packaging to avoid any confusion and lower the potential suspicions. And if you can carry the actual prescription with you at all times, it's definitely going to make it easier for you to bring medication from one country to another. Now a question about first aid kit. It's good to have one with you because you never know what situation are going to arise and where you're going to be at that moment. So what are the musts for a first aid kit?
So as you said, it's a really great idea to have a travel first aid kit, though you usually can buy supplies on the road from pharmacies. But if you're going to be doing any kind of remote travel, trekking or backcountry trips, hitchhiking, or you just want to be prepared, it's a great idea to have some supplies with you. And I actually learned that the hard way recently. I got an exhaust pipe burn from a motorcycle on my leg, and I didn't have a first aid kit. I had teeny tiny band-aids, which were not helpful at all. So I had to immediately board a bus crossing from Uganda to Kenya and had to sit for 6 hours with my burn totally exposed, collecting dust and debris from the bus. So had I had a first aid kit with gauze and some ointment, at least I could have protected it until I got somewhere that I could have cleaned it. So that was a lesson for me to be more prepared. So you can buy a first aid kit that's already assembled from most superstores or even Amazon, or you can create your own depending on the style of travel that you do and the activities that you're going to be doing. So I personally just made mine and have now added gauze and ointment and several sized band-aids, but I usually have anything from painkillers to rehydration salts and digestive aids to insect bite ointment and all-purpose hydrocortisone cream. But just keep in mind, if you're going to have gauze, it might be useful to have little scissors or tweezers, but if you're going to have that, you need to keep the first aid kit in your stow luggage. So don't keep the scissors in your carry-on.
Very true. And another something I could add, it would be to know your weaknesses when you make your own first aid kit. Personally, I have a poor digestive system, so I always carry charcoal pills with me when I travel, and I also carry antacid tabs. It helps me a lot. I also am very reactive to perfumes and soap, and I have a tendency to do urinary tract infections. So I not only bring medication in case this happens, but I also always carry a roll of toilet paper because it happened to me in the past to be in countries where they only use scented toilet paper, which is an odd concept for me. But it's actually popular in Latin America. I've seen it in Africa too. So I know that perfume toilet paper makes me react a lot. So I travel with my own. So know yourself, know your weaknesses, and bring the medication that you feel might be hard for you to find abroad if you're going on hikes or things like that.
Great.
That's it for the travel preparation section. Do you have anything to add, Stephanie, before we move on to the next section?
No, I think that was a great point.
Okay, so now we're moving on to when you reach destination. My first question is about dietary restrictions. So is it hard to travel with a dietary restriction, or do you have recommendations if you do?
Yeah, so I have a few recommendations. I personally have dietary restrictions. So this is coming from personal experience. If you have food allergies, sensitivities, or dietary restrictions, I really suggest doing research before you travel on the cuisine of your host country so you know what to expect. I also recommend preparing for a worst case scenario. So preparing for you getting contaminated, bringing any medications you might require if that happens, but also keeping in mind that this is just the worst case scenario. And with some preparations, it's totally possible to travel with dietary restrictions. So for myself, I always travel with a Tupperware container and utensil set so I can bring food with me on buses and planes. And this way, if meals provided or food available isn't suitable for me, I'm not going to starve. I have some food that I can eat and won't be hungry. You can also consider bringing some safe foods from home, so whether that's special snacks or energy bars, supplements, or multivitamins. And I also try to stay in places that have kitchen facilities, so for example, Airbnb or hostels, and that way I can cook my own meals. I also search for restaurants I search for restaurants ahead of time which I know will be able to accommodate me. So you're not waiting last minute and are in a pinch and end up somewhere that might not be able to accommodate and you could get contaminated. So if you are on a budget, hostels are a really, really great option. They usually have kitchen facilities and are usually conveniently located near superstores or grocery stores. So that can be the best way to ensure that you can prepare your own foods that are safe for you to consume.
And we are very lucky because nowadays there are a lot of travel blogs, and no matter what your dietary restriction is, I'm pretty sure there's a travel blog up there with good recommendations specific to your situation or specific to certain destinations. So there will be, vegan Japan or stuff like that. So use the information.
I would also add too, if you have a severe allergy or a severe sensitivity, I would consider if you're going somewhere where there's a significant language barrier, I'd consider getting the phrase I'm allergic to or I cannot eat, let's say it's peanuts, and get that translated in the language and write it down so you can bring it places and show people, restaurant staff, because otherwise it's so much trickier with the language barrier. When I moved to Tanzania, I think that was one of the first things I learned in Swahili. I don't eat meat.
Yes, that's a very good trick.
Yeah.
So, how do you keep your digestive system healthy when traveling? I know a lot of people experience all kinds of ups and downs with with their guts when they're on the road. So, do you have just general tips to help?
Yeah, and I think I'm someone with more of a sensitive stomach, so this is definitely one from personal experience, but I think it's sort of a multi-layered answer. And the first is down to maintaining a healthy lifestyle while you're traveling, and the other is just to actually stay healthy. So, but first of all, anytime we do long haul travel and we're sitting for long periods of time, our whole routine and systems are thrown off. So we aren't as active. Often we aren't drinking enough water, so we're dehydrated. We might not be eating enough, so the volume of food might not be enough, or it's just high fat, low fiber foods. and that can completely throw off our digestion. So for myself, I know on long haul plane rides, they give you those little cups of water, which is not enough for me. And I can be tempted by if they're offering me a free mini bottle of wine, and I'm always super dehydrated. So the first thing you can do is hydrate. Drink at least 2 liters of water a day. Eat some hydrating foods like fresh fruits, and continue eating balanced meals and staying active while you're traveling. So walking everywhere is a great option, and this can ensure that your digestion rebalances itself and stays healthy. The easiest way to actually get sick is through food or water contamination or self contamination. So you're actually touching something and then touching other food. So always wash your hands before eating. Carry around a little bottle of hand sanitizer if you can. And you can try to gauge the safety of food by the general cleanliness of the place you're eating. And this is a tricky one. And I think you said that you've learned that you could stay at a 5-star place and you're not necessarily safe from getting sick versus staying somewhere, camping somewhere, and you could be totally fine. And I've learned that too, where I've had street food and I've been totally fine. I've ate at a really nice restaurant and I've got sick. So it is tough to sort of figure that out. But I would say if you're eating maybe meat from a street place and the meat's not refrigerated, you're taking higher risk than a place where there's a kitchen facilities and a refrigerator. So yeah, and the other piece is the water. So always ask if water has been purified or boiled, or when in doubt, buy bottled water. If you don't want to contribute to the plastic waste, you can use self-filtering water bottles like the Grail. They're expensive, but if you're going to be traveling long term or you travel frequently, it could be an investment for you. Note that some of the filtering water bottles, like Wave Straw, they do not filter viruses, they only filter bacteria. So you could still be at risk for things like hepatitis or other viral infections.
And also, certain people don't only associate seafood and meat with dangers, but there's also amoeba that can be found on fruits and vegetables and leafy greens. So, also a good rule of thumb is to avoid fruits that you cannot peel. So, stick to fruits like mangoes and bananas, something that you can actually peel off. Or if you can't, at least wash them with purified water because you never know. And as we mentioned, being in a nice restaurant or hotel doesn't necessarily mean that it's safe. So question things like ice in your beverages. It's okay to ask if the ice comes from purified water or ask to not have any ice at all.
Yeah, that's a really great point because I don't personally eat meat, but I've still been sick plenty of times. So not having raw vegetables, like you said, trying to get everything cooked unless you can peel it, yeah, or wash it with purified water.
So if you do get sick, pretty much everybody is bound to get traveler's diarrhea at some point. What should you do, and when should you worry? Because it doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. It usually just goes away by itself.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, unfortunately, you can do everything right and still get sick, and it might seem contraindicative when you're really sick and you've got diarrhea, but take in as much fluids as you can because you're actually going to be really, really dehydrated. You're losing a lot of fluids, vitamins, and minerals that you've consumed, as well as electrolytes. So if you can even get rehydration salts, that's even better. You can also try taking in binding foods like bananas or high fiber biscuits or crackers. And if that doesn't work, you really struck down, you've got fever, aches, pains, vomiting, you might consider seeking medical advice, especially if your symptoms are worsening, they're not getting better, or they're very severe. I actually recommend not waiting it out, and I know that can be really difficult from a North American context. We're sort of conditioned not to go to a hospital or an urgent care center when you just have something minor like a stomach issue. But as we talked about, it could be an amoeba, it could be a parasite, it could be something else going on. And I've experienced that where I've put off something way, way too long, thinking, oh, I just ate something bad, and then it ended up being something that I needed a lot of medication for. So really just take care of yourself, and if the issue's not going away in a few days, I wouldn't put it off because I've done that before and I put it off for weeks and it ended up being something I needed antibacterials or antiparasitic medications for. So if that's the case, you can just, hopefully you've got your travel insurance and you can just go see a doctor. They'll likely have you do a stool sample and then maybe prescribe you some medication.
And something we don't hear about often, but which is also very common, is actually the other way around. It's the traveler's constipation. I have experienced it myself and I've read about it on blogs. We hear about the traveler's diarrhea, but know that it's also very possible when you travel and you lose your regular routine to experience certain blockage. So if that is the case, don't panic. It happens. It's not uncommon. And once again, it's kind of the same tips. Try staying active, staying hydrated as much as possible, and eating good fibers to help you get it going. And worst case scenario, try very spicy food. It might help. What about people suffering from motion or altitude sickness? Altitude sickness is not necessarily something we're familiar with because here in Canada we don't necessarily live in high altitude, but it is a real thing. So do you have any recommendations for that?
So first of all, I would say speak to your doctor about these issues, especially if you're already taking certain medications or you have any other health concerns, because there might be prescription medication you can actually take with you on the trip to lessen the impacts of these, but your doctor can tell you more specifically what those options are. But there are certainly lots of over-the-counter alternatives, such as gravel, and that's something that I usually keep in my self-made first aid kit. So my suggestions would be more compensatory strategies if you're experiencing these issues. So if you know that you already know that you suffer from motion sickness and you have to do a long bus ride or a ferry ride, avoid eating a big meal, avoid alcohol, avoid chugging lots of water directly before you board because this can worsen nausea. And I usually take a gravel before I get on a boat ride or a bus ride just to avoid nausea. And if I need to sleep through the ride, I can do that. And if you're on a train, avoid sitting backwards, or if possible, avoid looking through the side window because that's really going to trigger that motion sickness. In terms of altitude sickness, I haven't personally experienced this, but I know that it can actually progress into a medical emergency. So I would just recommend to be very cautious with this if you're experiencing symptoms, with not to push yourself beyond push yourself physically if you're experiencing those symptoms. If you are doing any kind of activity like hiking at high altitude, you might want to consider arriving at the destination days before embarking on the trek so you can acclimatize to that altitude. And worst case scenario, speak to your guide if you're hiking and you have symptoms, because they're the ones that are going to have the most experience in responding to that situation and giving you alternatives with what to do. I know there are special coca leaf teas that you could try. Again, I haven't personally used them. I don't know much about them, but so ask your doctor or do some more research, but there's certainly alternatives that you can try to help you.
And one thing about, I don't know much about the altitude sickness medication either, but one thing I do know about the motion sickness pills, sometimes they do cause drowsiness, some do, some don't, so look at the packaging carefully if you're going to take medication, because if you're going to transit but be in a situation where you still need to be aware, then look for the medication that is not going to cause drowsiness. Now, mosquitoes and ticks, they can carry disease and viruses. What do you recommend to be protected from them and avoid the mosquitoes and tick transmitted diseases?
So mosquitoes, first of all, are a huge, huge concern in most areas of the world for transmitting malaria, which can be fatal if not treated. So talk to your doctor about anti-malarial medications, as this could be a good preventative strategy for you to avoid contracting malaria. Unfortunately, some of the medications have some significant side effects, and again, something you need to talk to your doctor about. I've tried a few different ones over the years, and ultimately, because I live somewhere where I would be needing to take the medication every day for up to a year. I have made the personal decision not to take them, but that again is a personal decision, and I would suggest you would talk to a doctor first rather than just not take them because it's a very, very serious condition if you do contract it. But there are other methods that you can use, more lifestyle methods to avoid getting bit by mosquitoes. So things like using mosquito repellent at night and wearing long sleeve, long pants clothing, sleeping with a bed net, and really being vigilant about the avoidance of getting bitten. And with regards to ticks, they're known for spreading Lyme disease, which is again a very, very serious illness. And unfortunately, ticks are really hard to see. So be aware when you're entering an area that is known for ticks to take precautions. So use deep insect spray, wear long pants and socks, and always do a tick check on your skin. So when you get back, shower immediately and check your skin, or have someone else check your back or neck areas that you can't see yourself. And if you do notice a bite and happen to develop a rash or fever afterwards, seek medical help.
Yes, because these conditions,
Anything to add?
yeah, the disease is transmitted by mosquitoes, and ticks are not necessarily, they cannot necessarily be cured, but the symptoms can be lessen if you get medical treatment soon after being exposed to. So really being cautious is the key here. Similar topic, lice and bed bugs. I know certain people are scared when they're going to hostels and things like that too, or even an airplane to catch lice or bed bugs. Do you have ever experienced it, or do you have any recommendations?
I have not experienced either, thankfully, touch wood. Especially the head lice is always on my mind because I take a lot of bus rides. They're not always the most cleanly, and you're thinking you're leaning your head back against this headrest. Or sometimes, in the context of where I live, motorcycle taxis are a huge way to get around, and they give you this helmet everyone else is wearing. So I actually take precaution by using a buff. And if you're not familiar with that, it's sort of like a neck warmer. You can wear it as a headband, and I just pull it all the way around to protect my hair, and then use it as a sort of a protective shield between shared helmets, or on a dirty bus ride, I'll just put my hair up in this thing and then I can lean my head back. So, and then obviously wash it in between use. So that's maybe an extreme precaution, but I feel better doing that than just protecting myself. You can also, if you're really concerned, you can travel with your own pillowcase. And I actually do this, but I haven't had to use it yet. Thankfully, I've felt that I've stayed in pretty clean places. But bed bugs, unfortunately, are a lot harder to avoid because they don't necessarily indicate cleanliness. You can still get them at a five-star hotel. So, in theory, you could still. The issues with bed bugs spread, they could spread on your backpack or luggage. So, you could actually bring them into the hotel versus you getting them from the hotel. So a lot of backpackers are riding on buses and your backpack goes in the undercarriage, and you could get the bed bugs on your backpack that way and actually be the one to bring it into the hotel. So that's the tricky bit, is you can't always judge by the hotel or hostel's cleanliness, and if they do have bed bugs, it's not necessarily their fault. But I always recommend, regardless, to avoid placing your bag right on the bed or the floor near the bed. Use those luggage racks that come in the room, or if possible, place your bag on a hook. And in a hostel, you could put your bag directly in the storage locker. You can check your bed if you're concerned by peeling back the sheets and looking at the corners of the mattress for insects or excrement or stains. I know that's gross, but those are the things that you want to look for. And I always personally take preventative measures when coming home from a trip because I do take a lot of bus rides when my bag's in the undercarriage. I immediately come home and unpack and throw all my stuff in the washer on high temperature. I throw my backpack itself in there. If you can't actually wash your luggage, but it's not the hard case, it's that sort of soft material, I would just suggest keeping it in a garage or basement if you can't actually wash it in high temperature heat.
Okay, now different topic. How do you stay in good health when traveling? It's hard sometimes to keep a fitness routine, but do you have a personal routine or just general tips for staying healthy?
Mhm. I think this sort of depends if you travel more as a lifestyle versus if you travel sort of a 1 week vacation here, 1 week vacation there, because you're going to have a different mentality in how you travel. But I do think that traveling itself is a great way to not only stay in good physical shape, but to get in physical shape. So if you think about it, you're hauling heavy luggage, like walking times at the airport or while you're sightseeing, or oftentimes we do activities where we're on foot, like walking tours. And if you aren't overcompensating for this by drinking tons of alcohol and eating fatty foods, then travel can actually be a form of exercise in itself. But I think the trouble is that most people get into the mentality that they're on vacation, they're in vacation mode, and it's easier to allow yourself to eat and drink in abundance versus moderation. And therefore, there's always excess calories you can't always burn off. So I personally travel with the yoga mat, and that might not be something for everyone, but for me, traveling more long term, it's proven to be effective for me to stay in good physical shape, but also to stay mentally healthy. And when I travel, I try to walk everywhere. I try to do activities when possible that are physical activities like sandboarding or snorkeling or scuba diving. So my first priority when I do those activities is just for fun or for the adventure, but it's a win-win because it's exercise right there. I also, as I mentioned before, I try to stay in places that has kitchen facilities so I can be preparing my own foods and preparing healthy foods and traveling with Tupperware utensils, trying to have snacks on me so that I can eat when I'm hungry and not get to that point where I'm starving and I just scarf down an entire pizza. So I think everything's in moderation, just like in daily life. So definitely you can have fun and you can eat and you can drink and try these different types of foods, but then just balance it with plenty of water and activity. You should be able to stay in shape.
I agree. And I personally love hiking, but I also just like walking around. So it's a very easy and good way to stay healthy when you're
Mm-hmm.
traveling. Um, One thing I would like to add before we change section is about just a little word of warning about the dangers of the sun and the heat. Sometimes we don't necessarily think about the repercussions that long-term exposure can have. We're going to put sunscreen and things like that, but we can sometimes have a tendency to be a little tenacious in the sun. But just know that heat exhaustion and heat strokes are real issues and can be quite severe. I actually had a heat exhaustion myself because I wanted to go on a hike. I thought it was fine. I have a big tolerance to heat, but my body did not send me the signals. Also, I thought that staying hydrated was enough to prevent a heat stroke, but that is not necessarily the case. So if you do go on hikes or if you're going to be on a beach where there's a lot of sun and not necessarily a possibility for you to seek shelter, make sure that you wear protection, that you wear a hat, that you look for shade every now and don't stay in the sun for too long because seriously, heat exhaustion can get you sick for several days and even have lifetime repercussions. So this is something to really consider. And also before leaving or once you're abroad, just without freaking yourself out, have a look at the potential threats that are in the country. So have a look at the wildlife. What kind of bugs are there? What kind of animals? What kind of natural disaster? The point is not to be afraid of everything, but it's just to know what the actual risks are so that you can handle them properly should a situation come. So if you get bitten by something, then you can know ahead, oh, okay, I've seen this, this is not dangerous, this is not poisonous, or okay, no, I know that this country has this type of snake or this type of spider, and that they can be very venomous, so that if you are in a situation, you know whether to look for medical assistance or not, and know for natural disasters that can occur like tsunamis or flash floods. Flash floods was not something that I knew about, and once again, I was on a hike in Arizona, and I knew nothing about flash floods, and I I could have been in a situation that could have been really dangerous if the person I was with did not know about it. But luckily, it started to rain, and he knew that there could be flash floods. But I was like, no, it's totally fine. We can keep on hiking. But we avoided a very potentially dangerous situation. So prepare yourself and ask around so you can feel safe. Do you have anything to add before we move on to the last segment of the webinar?
No, I think those are all great points, and I think the take-home message is just that preparation piece of knowing sort of what you're getting into so that you can respond appropriately.
The last segment is called emotional roller coaster. So we're going to talk about the emotions and that can arise when you're traveling. So first of all, question about mental health. Traveling can be really challenging. It can be confronting, exhausting. Do you think that people with mental health conditions should travel or should refrain from traveling? Is it safe to travel if you have a condition?
That's a really great question. And as you mentioned, travel can be extremely stressful at times. However, I don't think that anyone with a mental health condition should necessarily refrain from traveling just because of their diagnosis. I know a lot of travelers and even travel bloggers who identify as having anxiety or depression or panic attacks, and they're still able to travel the world. But I would say I would definitely speak to your doctor, particularly if you do take medication and you're not sure how maybe changing time zones or altering your routine might impact you, because travel can be a trigger, it can be stressful. However, on the other hand, it could offer life-changing experiences. So I think travel should be inclusive and have something to offer everyone, regardless of physical or mental health. It's just the ways in which we travel might differ. So someone who does have a mental health disorder might do better traveling with a close friend or family member, or traveling domestically in the beginning to sort of build up that confidence level in a more familiar environment, or even doing an organized tour group, so it eliminates that necessity to do all of the planning for a trip. So there are many options to accommodate all different types of travelers. And if you're keen to read more about personal experiences traveling with a mental health condition, you can check out my friend Stephen from The Anxious Adventurer, and he writes about what it's like to travel with anxiety. Or there's another travel blogger, Lauren from Never Ending Footsteps, who also openly talks about her mental health. So there's so many options online where you can, if you have a mental health condition and you're concerned that you want to travel, or you're just concerned what would that be like, there's lots of people who do blog about that, and you can get sort of that first person experience from them.
One thing I would add is make sure that your travel insurance covers mental health emergencies. So it is not necessarily included in your policy. So if you feel like you are at risk, just negotiate it with your insurance provider, or make sure that it is part of your coverage. And yes, bring your prescription with you if you do take medication. Now, the culture shock can be a big trigger. Are there ways to soften the culture shock?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this can be a huge impact on mental health as well. I think you actually, in order to sort of soften the impacts of culture shock, you need to first understand what it is and recognize the symptoms, so you know, first of all, if you're experiencing it. So culture shock is essentially a really common phenomenon that travelers or those living abroad can experience after being immersed in a new culture or society. So people who have culture shock will generally, you may not feel it at first. You might be in sort of a honeymoon phase where everything is exciting and fun, and you might transition to feeling frustrated, and eventually you get to the sort of adjustment or acceptance phases. But initially, you might be frustrated or overwhelmed or emotional, and it can be experienced very differently by different people. But the main thing to know is that it's very natural to feel overwhelmed at times in a new place or unfamiliar situation. It's happened to me, but knowing how to handle it can help you not only get the most out of your trip and enjoy yourself, but also to be a respectable guest in that different culture. So knowing how to act and be respectful abroad. So some ways that you can overcome it, or that you can know how to react when experiencing culture shock are to first do research ahead of time. And this is sort of, I think, an overarching theme in this webinar is this preparation piece. So do some research ahead of time so that you know what to expect and you're sort of mentally prepared for any significant differences. So you could familiarize yourself with the official language of the country you're going to, the time difference, the temperature, the population size, the religions and traditional customs, the currency, any tourist scams or dangers or precautions you should be aware of. And once you know these things, you can logistically be prepared for them and be prepared for challenges you might experience, such as a language barrier or limited Wi-Fi, which can be stressful for some of us. Another great way to overcome culture shock is to make a local friend or meet other travelers, and you can have other people to sort of bounce off of. So that's a really great way to overcome some of the challenges of culture shock. If you do find yourself experiencing it, just take it easy and practice some self-care. I know for myself, I find basic things like if I'm hungry or thirsty, if I'm hot or too tired, they can really impact my mental state. And so if I'm feeling overwhelmed or irritated or frustrated, I sort of just do a body scan and see if any of those reasons are impacting me. And if so, just take a break. Don't force yourself to do everything and see everything. You're going to have time to do all of that. And if you're not going to enjoy it, then there's no point. So once you feel more calm and rested, you can get back out there. And I do have some more resources on this on my website if you're interested in reading a bit more on culture shock.
Similar thing that we can experience, but we don't hear about as often, is the post-travel blues. So have you experienced it yourself, and do you have any tips to cope with it?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to know that it's totally normal. It's something that I've definitely experienced, and it can be linked with reverse culture shock, which is an actual thing. And it can also come from a sense of detachment with the people at home when you return from a big trip. So sometimes it can be hard when you have all these amazing experiences that travel offers, and sometimes it can feel like the people we left behind at home, like family or friends, can't really understand or relate what we went through. So it can feel isolating. But one thing that I don't suggest is having sort of a back to reality mentality, because this plants the seed in our minds that travel is a vacation from our lives. And who really wants to live life feeling like they need a vacation from reality? I just sure don't. So if we can instead create the sense of normalcy around travel, where it's just a part of our lifestyle, maybe we can be a traveler in our hometown and still have those feelings of adventure and joy and discovering new experiences. And there isn't such a drastic duality or difference anymore between everyday life and travel. And so once we wrap our minds around this, it opens up a whole new perspective of how we can travel. So you don't necessarily need to hop on a plane and go to a new part of the world. You could explore your own province or state and do a variety of fun and adventurous things on a shoestring budget, or not have to use all of your vacation time or your life savings. So I would recommend for anyone who has the post-travel blues, just think about how you're actually conceptualizing travel in itself. And with a slight alteration of our perspective of what travel actually means, we can really bring those meaningful elements that travel provides us without necessarily going on vacation. And the other piece I would say, if you're struggling with post-travel blues, I say this because I've been there, don't bottle it up and keep it to yourself. Talk to someone. And there's so many wonderful travel communities out there now with the internet, especially Facebook groups I've found. There's going to be people who know exactly what you're going through and can support you and offer advice. And finally, if you ever feel like the travel blues are contributing to anxiety or depression or impacting your daily life in a negative way, it might be time to talk to your doctor or trusted friends to get some help with your mood, and know that that's okay and that's not anything to be ashamed about or embarrassed about.
These were really good tips. Thank you. Do you have anything to add before we see if we have any questions in the Q&A?
No, nothing to add here.
Okay. Welcome back, Marie-Gilles. Did we have any questions or comments?
Yes, so we have one question. So, if you get sick or have health issues and you need to get to a clinic or a hospital, how can you know which one to go to make sure you receive decent services? So, we've all heard like horror stories of sometimes people going to um, clinics where the level of health services is not that good. So, how can you make sure it's a good one?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my personal experience, I've really, really relied on local knowledge sources. So I can recall one time I was really sick in India. I was staying at a hotel. So the hotel staff were amazing in actually taking me to the hospital, but they were able to provide the information of which hospital would be best suited for me based on my travel insurance. So asking local people is a really great way. If you're not staying in a hotel, you could ask, like if you've made any local friends, like whether if you're couch surfing, you could ask your local host. Or if you're living abroad and you're sort of more embedded in the community, you can ask other people in your community. So, for example, where I live in Tanzania, there's a few different clinics and hospitals, and I would know the private one is a little bit less chaotic, it's a little bit quieter, and it's private. So I can go there knowing my travel insurance is accepted versus the public hospital. I might be waiting hours and hours and hours, and it's either way, it's not going to cost me money. So I would go to the public one. So it's sort of just navigating the system and using local knowledge sources if you can. If you don't know anyone, then I guess you would be Googling, or there, I know that there's different platforms for international health emergencies, so to speak, where you can call or get online and ask, I have this issue and I'm located here, XYZ. Where should I go to get help?
I think you can also ask your travel insurance company directly. Sometimes they can do recommendations to where would be a better place to go. If you're really at loss, maybe you can call the consulate or the embassy, the Canadian embassy in the country you're in. But yes, Google is also a really good help.
Yeah. And I've even, when I was in Kigali, Rwanda, actually recently, I walked in somewhere off the street because it was sort of like I saw this hospital, I needed to seek attention, and it ended up being a really, really good experience. But sometimes you don't always have the time in a situation to be doing the research. So that's another great reason to be prepared with travel insurance and to keep your information or your travel card with you.
Yes, and if you have allergy to medicine or special condition, make sure that you have your bracelet, the bracelet that says that you have a specific condition, so that if you are unable to speak, unconscious, or if there's nobody with you, the people giving you medical attention can still know that you have a specific condition. Anything else, Marie-Gilles?
No, that's what we received today, but as always, you can always comment in the video that's going to be posted afterwards as well, and we're going to make sure to answer there as well.
Well, that's it for today's webinar. Thank you so much for watching. Here are the links to our websites. Do not hesitate to contact us if you have questions or comments. We will all be very happy to assist you. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here today and sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you, Marie-Gilles, too, for moderating this session. I hope you all have a good day and see you soon.
Bye. Thank you.